Welcome to the Crafting Character Podcast. Steve Carter here, and in association with my good friends at Preaching Today and Food for the Hungry, I bring you a podcast that hopefully helps you get better at the craft of preaching and teaching God's word while always ensuring that our character leads the way. Well, today I'm excited because over the last number of months, I've started to connect with a man who lives in Richmond, Virginia, and his name is Brian Lee. And Brian has been a pastor. When you hear this guy speak, you're gonna fall in love with him like I did. I got off the phone with him the first time, and I was like, "Are we best friends? Where's this guy been?" He's one of the most thoughtful people, and just the way that he speaks, the tone, the grace. He's just remarkable human. And he runs a not-for-profit called Broken to Beloved. And hear this as like a statement. This is what's on their website. Broken to Beloved is a space for the broken and hurting, for those who feel like wanderers in search of a safe place to land, for those who feel cast aside or cast out by institutions and systems of faith. If you've ever experienced hurt or harm at the hands of the church or her leaders, then this is a safe space for you. This is a place to discover a path towards healing and wholeness. And why I wanted Brian to come on is because I know so many of you, you're senior pastors, you're leading college ministries, student ministries. None of us were trained in seminary and in Bible college to handle what we're having to handle today. And this is why coaches like Brian, organizations like Broken to Beloved, gatherings like we'll talk about a little bit later, I think are so important for us to be trained in so that we don't unintentionally hurt people in our congregation. And so with that, that's what we're going to be chopping up today. And I'm so excited. Brian Lee, thanks for joining me on the Crafting Character Podcast.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's good to be here. And yes, we are best friends.
Yeah. See, I'm going to add that to my LinkedIn account. So talk about, Brian, like your kind of like the why. Like I read that statement first time, like when we chopped, I was like, man, I got to learn everything about Broken to Beloved. And I went to the website, saw that. I was like, oh my goodness, like just the thoughtfulness in language, but that kind of level of intentionality doesn't just happen. Talk a little bit, maybe if you feel comfortable, about the why behind the beginnings and the origin story of Broken to Beloved.
Yeah. Thanks for the chance to. It came out of my personal hurt and pain and trauma. It's this idea that I've been through 3 different experiences and environments now in different faith spaces where I've suffered at the hands of really toxic or poor leadership. And it left me reeling. We talked about identity. We talked about the sense of purpose. And if I wasn't doing this job anymore, if I'm not fit to be a pastor anymore for whatever reason that I think it's my fault, because that's how gaslighting works, then who am I? I felt completely untethered. I felt completely lost and just very broken. I felt shattered by the experience. I took a short break after 2 back-to-back experiences, kind of had a breath of fresh air at a church in New Jersey before moving here to Virginia, where I experienced the worst of the 3. And this time I kind of came in with eyes wide open, right? And my wife and I said to each other before we moved, he said, I would love if this place works out. You know, they kind of hype themselves up as being a place of healing, and it would be really beautiful if that can happen for us here. And we really hope it does. And if for any reason it doesn't, I think we need to take a break from ministry for a little while. And after about 3 or 4 years, it did not go well. And so I am currently on a break from vocational ministry, but also running this nonprofit. I've maintained my credentials. And it came out of that process of brokenness and recognizing that through lots of therapy and counseling, through lots of reading books and finding resources, I discovered that I had over identified myself as broken. That I introduced myself in new situations as, hi, my name is Brian and I'm damaged goods. When I went through the interview process at this last church, the elders were part of that process, one of the final meetings, and they said, hey, why should we hire you? Like, why do you want to be here? And I told them, I said, to be completely honest, I don't want to be here and you don't want to hire me because I'm damaged goods. I'm very broken. We need a lot of healing, and we're not in a great place. But if this is something God wants to do, we also don't want to say no. And that's why we're here through this interview process. And I recognized way later, it's easy to say too late. It was just later that I had over-identified myself as broken, and that's not who I was. It's who I thought I was, but it's not. I am actually beloved, and there's nothing that I can do or not do that changes God's opinion of me. And recognizing that extends to everyone else too, who's been through something like that, that if I've done this for myself, I probably can easily imagine that other people have done it too. And if I can do the work to find a path towards that wholeness, towards that integrity, towards a path toward healing and feeling whole again, and if there's anything I can do to help someone else get there, I feel like I have to do that. And that's where it came from.
I love that. I'm curious because to find yourself living with a story that you are damaged goods, that you are broken. And I love that language of over-identifying with. I always will say that, humans are very perceptive. They're just crappy interpreters of reality. It's like how we interpret what we perceive is where like all of the pain and struggle often comes from, because of the meaning making that we create. You being damaged goods and broken doesn't just happen. As you did work, was that something you were hearing within some of the systems that you were working? Was that something that just, it's been a part of your childhood? Like, talk about that, because I think in one sense, here's what I'm trying to get at. I think unhealthy systems, don't want to acknowledge that they have hurt people.
Yeah.
And what's easier to say is they couldn't cut it with a job. Yep. They are not emotionally well. They are broken. Often those systems put those language because it gives them in their mind permission to behave the way that they're behaving. And so I'm just curious, like, what I appreciate is your pursuit for wholeness and your recognition of like, hey, I over-identified with this. But I'm just curious, like, was that told to you from the systems? Was that something you felt? Why did you start to over-identify with?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it was a combination of both, where my personality is such that I already have a bent towards black and white thinking. And I already think that everything I do is wrong and that it can be fixed or improved, right? And then to take that and put myself in an environment where the leader of the organization calls me into his office, who I've had a long-standing, beautiful relationship with, and have just seen the toxicity grow over the coming years, sit me down and say, Brian, maybe you're just not a nice person. And I just was in complete shock and didn't know what to do with that statement. Everything I knew in me said, everyone in the other building would tell you that I am, but maybe you're right because you're the leader and you're a spiritual authority. So maybe I should believe you and start examining myself and what's wrong with me, right? And then in my second place, where the pastor sits down with me and the business administrator, and they offer me a different job. I was the worship pastor at the time. Every review has been excellent up until that point. I'm always asking, because I'm always wanting to improve things or fix things or make them better. Hey, is there anything I'm missing right now? Is there something else that you want that I can do better? never received feedback. All of a sudden, I'm being offered a different job as I don't even remember what the position was anymore. It had to do with technology. And I said, this is nothing that I'm qualified for. Why would you do this? Why do I not get to keep the job I already have? And was never really given an answer. Except that, hey, our church needs to be known for its preaching or its music. And we all know it's not going to be the preaching. So it's got to be you. So you've got to go. And I kind of sat there across the table looking at him like, you're the pastor who does the preaching, right? And you're saying this out loud with your mouth, but you want me to be the scapegoat. And I kind of saw this coming because they had already seen an exodus of staff who had been pushed out. So it was a matter of time. But I wasn't in a position to stand up for myself. I was still in a position of I should just take what I can and get out if I can in one piece, which I didn't. It was a lot of that kind of talk of maybe I'm not cut out for this job. Maybe there is something really fundamentally wrong with me because right now the common denominator is me in these situations. And it took me to a really dark place, right? And finally, by the time I got to the third place, I was beginning to get some language to advocate for myself, to recognize what the healthy portions were, to recognize that my rootedness and identity is not in the job or what other people say or think about me, but in what Christ believes about me, in the way that I've been uniquely called and gifted to do what I do. So that by the time I was sitting in this third pastor's office and him looking at me and saying, maybe you're just not a pastor, I get to look at him and say, and you don't get to make that call. I've been credentialed, I've been ordained by a governing body of other people. You don't get to decide that about me. This is something God has called me to. And it was such a shift of identity and belonging that absolutely grounded me in the truth of that moment, to not be pushed around or completely shattered again in that process. And I was so grateful that there was someone else in the office who heard that. I was like, you heard him say that, right? She goes, I can't believe he did that. I said, I'm telling you, this is the way he talks to me regularly. But by then I had a sense of identity built in myself through the therapy and counseling and reading to be able to say, okay, I don't have to receive that anymore from someone else.
That is so weighty in so many ways. And, it's, you get to a point where I'm just thinking about Jacob and Esau and thinking about how Jacob, every time he is asked, what is your name? He says, I'm Esau. I'm Esau. Mm-hmm. And then he finds himself wrestling in the middle of the night. And the Lord, the angel says, like, what is your name? And it's the first time he ever says, I'm Jacob. And the angel goes, no, you're not. You're Israel. Which means, to suffer with God and others and overcome. And I see that, like those moments where you have to do the work and fight against the internal lies, the internal shame, the vocal words from people that you respected. Mm-hmm. It is a wrestling. It is a dark night of the soul, dark weeks of the soul, dark months of the soul. But when you can get to that point of like, I am a pastor, like I have been credentialed. Like you don't get like that level of breakthrough is what makes you profoundly dangerous to the system and also to the kingdom of God. And I mean dangerous to the system in a good way and dangerous to the kingdom of God in a good way. Like it's because it's like you can actually literally see what is happening and you can see it within you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, Brian, because again, I'm trying to like have the most amount of empathy for the pastors right now who don't know you and they're taking my word for how awesome you are because you are. But I'm like, I think that so many of us again, weren't taught HR protocols in Bible
Yeah.
college and seminary. We weren't taught complex trauma. We didn't have language like trauma informed. I mean, I knew what to do if a child or a student or someone in my congregation had admitted that they had been sexually abused. I was taught that what you were supposed to, but not how to walk with, not how to hold space for. And I think the church is has been late to the game in mental health, has been late to the game in emotional well-being, has been late to the game in being trauma informed. And we have a bunch of people on our staff who have been late to the game on being trauma informed, who have been doing the inner journey, going to therapy, dealing with their trauma and pain. And so now it's like this sense where these, boomer leaders, these, Gen X leaders who haven't done the work are now looking at a set of problems like, I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that's one of the gifts that Broken to Beloved plays that I have found so helpful, because like there's not a ton of people. I mean, I can go find like a cohort of pastors to go hang out with. There's not there's not places outside of some great books, but gathering places or coaches to help an institution or organization be more healthy and not unintentionally or intentionally hurt people. Talk about like what you see that churches need, even if they like, best Christian workplace are like considered really, really good to an unhealthy, toxic culture. Like, what do you see that church leaders today need to know, their elder boards need to know, their executive teams need to know, and need to grow in? Talk about that.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. Trauma is real, number one. And not only is it real, it's bigger than you think it is. And it's not your fault that you don't know, because seminaries and Bible colleges absolutely are not teaching this stuff, because mostly they're not equipped to either, right? And you've already got so many credits crammed in there with the essentials of what it means to lead a church or to be a pastor, and taking your Greek and your Hebrew and your theology and all these things and your church administration and grief counseling. It's like all of these pieces. And yet, there are so many layers, right? And I recently made a video for the conference that calls to pastors and just recognizes, hey, pastors, like, I recognize that ministry can feel like an impossible job at times, because you are wearing the hat of like 18 different jobs at the same time, and you're expected to be good at all of them. It's a lose-lose situation. And the way that we set ourselves up for failures as pastors is when we buy the story that we're supposed to be good at all of them, and that we're supposed to succeed at all of them, and that we're supposed to be perfect, and that we're supposed to set the moral example, and not allow ourselves to also be human, and not allow ourselves to also need God just as much as the people that we preach to or work with. And so it's when that little shift happens that we elevate ourselves onto this platform that we were never supposed to be on, right? And so just recognize that, first of all, this is not expected and required of you because it is not realistic. And that's okay. Let yourself be human. Let yourself be finite, right? Kelly Kapic writes the book, You're Only Human. It's like, we have limits. Live within them. And then recognize that trauma, and let's define it really quickly so everyone's on the same page, is the result of any event that overwhelms your nervous system and your ability to cope in the moment. Anything that's too much, too soon, too fast, or undermines your normal ability to cope and then return to your own sense of safety. And trauma happens all the time, but as long as you're able to metabolize it and process it, you're going to be okay. It's when it becomes overwhelming or too much for your system that it shuts down or goes into fight or flight freeze mode, right? According to the Global Center for Religious Trauma, they estimate conservatively that 1/3 of US adults have experienced religious trauma at some point in their life. And then concludes that between 10 to 20% of US adults currently suffer from religious trauma and its symptoms. I did a bunch of numbers and looked up census things and all that kind of stuff. The way that works out is basically the population of the entire state of Texas. 250 million adults in the US. That means 58 million adults have experienced trauma. And we have no context for those kinds of numbers. So the average church size, believe it or not, in America is 65 people. This means that 20 of them in your church have experienced religious trauma, and 10 of them are currently suffering from it. It's not a small problem, and it's not going away.
Brian, why I've had bad bosses before in the business world. I've had bad bosses, in the church world. I've had great bosses in the business world, great bosses in the church space. Why does the church boss hurt more than the business boss? Why? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why do we, I don't think there's no studies going, I got business work trauma because GE wasn't great to me, or BP wasn't awesome, or, but we have this. What is it about the church that, in the spiritual side, that creates the kind of trauma that would be every person in the state of Texas?
Yeah. Well, I think simply because we expect the church to be better, right? It has this air of spirituality around it. It has this supposed endorsement of God behind it. This is God's church. This is his body. This is the body of Christ. Therefore, when I go work for it, things should be perfect. Things should be wonderful. And so we walk in, and this is for people who are working in churches, not just attending churches, but you have this assumed sense that I'm not going to go work for a person. I'm not going to go work for a flawed, sinful human being. I'm going to go work for this spiritual authority who speaks as the mouthpiece of God. And therefore, we put too much weight on their words or their actions or their behaviors when those pastors and leaders don't, like we said, allow themselves to be human and imperfect. And I've experienced both ends of that spectrum, of the ones who put themselves up and the ones who have a very humble and realistic view of themselves. It's like, hey, Brian, I just need you to know I mess up all the time. And here's a way I did it yesterday. They don't just say it theoretically. They give me examples like, by the way, I want to tell you about a conversation I really screwed up and had to go apologize for. Yeah. And for me, my respect meter goes up way more for that person than the person who's always name dropping or trying to talk about their accomplishments, right? So again, it makes sense why it feels so different within the church than out in the quote unquote secular world, because we don't allow ourselves to need God, apparently, right?
Wow. Brian, let's just like stay here for a second, because I think what you're getting at is just so important. I think one of the surprising factors in the context I am in today, leading a church, is I feel like there's an invitation to a slower way, and everything inside me has been groomed and trained to go faster, to get bigger, to get more resources, to build, to grow, to go. And then when you say 22 out of the 65 people in the average church are dealing with some form of religious, spiritual trauma, and we're asking them to go and build and grow and move, and they're like, I can't.
Yeah.
And it's like almost forcing me to wonder, gosh, is this like a time for us to have to look back and go, we're going to have to go slower. And at a slower pace than maybe the boomer generation went in building. And it might not get as big as quickly, and it might not even get as big ever. But that doesn't mean if it wasn't successful. It's like you finished the race. You built a healthy system. But like, speak to that, because I'm thinking about the context that I'm in, in the Northwest suburbs, where there's been 5 large churches that have been affected. And I feel as if I'm Carmi, who was groomed for New York restaurants. And I'm like making Italian sausage with a whole bunch of people who don't know how to trust because their trust has been broken. And I'm like, let's go. And then I'm like, oh, wow, this is going to go a lot slower. And it's forcing me to have to deal with some of my like desires to grow and even the unhidden ambitions, But talk about that. Like, how do we serve the 22 well that are hurting and not forget about the 44 that are like in a place of a good space? How do you do that well? And what do you see for the future of the local church?
Wow.
That's a total run-on question. I'm so sorry. I'm the best at run-on questions and leaving people be like, what was your actual question? But like, hopefully that made some sense.
I think it makes some sense. I think the church, not as a whole, but the American church for sure, has been infected with this business CEO mentality of up and to the right, like you're saying, and constant growth. There are consulting places that I know of and am aware of and have worked with who are all about the numbers and the growth, and who sort of promise / even demand that the minimum growth rate should be double kingdom impact based on the parable, right? And it's just so dangerous. And I often talk about the body of Christ in 1 Corinthians 12 and this idea that we are all meant to be members of it, that no one of us is more or less important than the other. Even though it might get more attention or get hidden away or whatever it is, we all serve a role, and we can't say, I don't need you, right? And I also think about the false dichotomy that healthy things grow and unhealthy things don't. And so therefore, we must manufacture and systematize everything to constantly be in growth. For all the churches out there who say that healthy things grow, I often respond, so does cancer. And there's this dualistic, binary, black and white thinking in a lot of unhealthy churches that demand an either or. When I'm learning more and more to accept and live in the tension of both and. For the person who comes into the church holding some history of trauma, to say, hey, listen, I want you to know that the vision of our church is healthy growth, right? And Scott and Laura talk about it in Pivot and Tove, this idea of peach trees and growth. And here's the process. This is where we want to go, and not but, because but dismisses everything you say before, right? And allows room to include. And I recognize that you're not in a place to do this right now. And that's okay. And we want you to move at the pace that you need to. And I recognize that you've experienced something hard. Most often, people who have experienced some trauma just want to be heard and believed, rather than just say, oh, it couldn't have been that bad. And then they're just dismissed and re-traumatized all over again, right? And I think when we as pastors allow for both and allow for tension and allow for people to come in with their hurt and their pain and their suffering and to say, I see you, I hear you, I believe you, I'm so sorry that happened to you, that should never have happened. And I hope that you can find healing here. Not that we're going to demand it of you, not that I'm going to pray with you right now, expecting that next week this will be gone and resolved, because I've heard and experienced that too, right? That churches will tolerate your prayer requests for a short window of time. And then after so many weeks or months or years, they'll say, I'm sorry, you're still praying about that thing? Right? And we do that to people all the time. We don't mean it that way, but it just comes out in our language, right? So what does it look like to to operate that way. And I can't think of his name right now, but the systems thinker who talks about being mechanics versus gardeners, that we've treated churches like machines where when something doesn't work or stops working or needs to be quote unquote fixed, church leader, volunteer, member, whoever it is, it's like we just change the gears or replace a part and we move on. We discard staff members constantly. And it's not right. It's not healthy. It's not helpful. Instead, we need to think like gardeners who are low to the ground and getting in the dirt and waiting at the pace. Because when you force something to grow out of season or out of time, we do harm to that thing, right? There are seasons for a reason. And in the winter of our lives, things have to rest. A tree has to rest, recognizing that it's storing up its energy so that it can send up growth in the spring when it's time. If I prune in the fall, I trick a tree into thinking, hey, it's time to send up new shoots. It's time to grow. And then the winter comes and the sap freezes and the whole tree dies. When we do things out of season or out of time, we do more harm than good, even though our intentions may be pure. So just learning how to recognize those things and learn how to do them in time, in season, in place, holding both and intention that, hey, two things can belong at the same time and be okay. And I'm human and I have limits and I can't be expected to do it all. And that's okay too. Then we set ourselves up for much better places that are more open to hearing stories and welcoming the people who need the help the most without setting ourselves up for failure by projecting ourselves to be something that we're not.
That's so good. I'm curious because, if you think about when we were kids going to church and if the word abuse was used, like let's say, for instance, the pastor's talking about like, you gotta fight to stay in the relationship. You gotta do whatever it takes to stay in the relationship. And then there became like kind of like this vocal add-on sentence. You have to fight to stay in the relationship. And if you're experiencing a level of abuse, it's okay to have boundaries. And like this add-on sentence started to happen. I'm thinking about this because Andi Colbert, who she's going to be at the gathering that you're putting on in Richmond, Virginia, she and I were talking once, and she was saying like, Steve, what's interesting is sometimes when preachers are trying to communicate grace, the tone and the language is actually communicating shame. And it's just their posture, their energy. And I've thought about this because I think that for the local church leader, if you're sitting in the congregation and you're one of the 22 who is just needing some time to heal, and I'm in a vision weekend and I'm trying to call the church to like, we got to go towards this vision. What 2 or 3 sentences would you like a pastor to say to you? If you're one of the 22 of the 65 that is in a dark or hard or hurting season?
Wow. I don't think pastors need to apologize for their vision, first of all. And I love what Andi said about thinking that we're communicating grace, but actually communicating shame. And the man who wrote the Mechanics Gardeners thing, Peter Senge, I found it. Let me say one more thing that he says, and then I'll try to answer your question, is that when we think too much like mechanics, not enough like gardeners, we end up creating automatons. And then when people get too people-y, we get upset. And it's just this idea that people are people and they're going to get people-y. And listen, I love systems probably more than the average person. And yet I recognize that those systems have to work within the lives of everyday people. And I don't want to apologize for a vision that I have, because especially if it's something that I truly believe that God has given me for this church that I am stewarding for now. And I make space for those people who are just not there right now. And so, listen, if you're hearing this and it sounds like too much, too fast, that's okay. And if you're not in a place to engage with this right now, that's okay, because this is not that season for you. And if this is truly something that God has given us, it's going to happen regardless of my involvement in it or not. And you are no less beloved because you're not part of it. And the people who go after this with everything they have are no more beloved because they are part of fulfilling that mission. You belong here. You are welcome here. We want to give you all the time and the space to find the healing that you need at your pace and within the season that it's supposed to be for you. And for the next 3, 5, 7 years, this is the direction we're headed in. And we would love when you are ready to join us.
That's so good. I love the care in that. And I've still even thinking about the pruning in November and the sap will freeze and you're tricking the tree. And I think like sometimes we unintentionally almost trick the nervous system of our congregation. And they're like, I should be going. But when you can just be able to name it, just like you name it, what you're actually doing is helping the congregant's nervous system to exhale and go, oh, this place sees me and trusts me, or this place sees me and is making space for me, and I can maybe trust again. Like it just, it's slow and steady in that. One more piece to that, because I think whenever I'm writing a message, I think about my audience, and this is again just pretty generalized, but and maybe this is help for some of you who are listening, but you're always speaking, and there's some group in there that are already convinced. They're convinced. They're in. They're just like, they're gonna, you say show up at 6 a.m. on Thursday at Denny's, they are there. They are already convinced. You have a group of people that are curious. They're just curious, like, what is this whole thing about? Curious, like, what's the vision? Curious about Jesus, curious about faith. They're just curious. You have people that are profoundly cynical and just like, that's not going to work. That's, it was better with the other leader, And then you have people who are cautious. And the cautious are the ones that I would say are in that 22 out of the 65 that require a care with our tone, our words, and the acknowledgement that there's space for them to heal. And I just, the way you detailed that, I think most leaders and preachers are only speaking to the already convinced and the curious, shaming the cynical and shaming the cautious to get your stuff together. Go.
Yeah.
So I think what's so beautiful about what you have done is, you've got an incredible board, but you are putting together a live conference for church leaders and pastors on September 26th in Richmond, Virginia. It's going to be an awesome church. And then you're actually, I don't know if you're going to regret this later, but I love that you decided to do another conference, or you're calling it a gathering, the next day. And this one's for like congregations and people who have experienced like church hurt or wanting to really find a safe space. Yeah. Talk about the conference and then talk about why do it for two different audiences and what your hope is. Because I want as many church pastors and leaders to go because I believe in the bride of Christ. I want her to flourish. I want her to be radiant. I want her to be healthy. And I think the work that you're doing is going to help us get closer to that dream. Talk about the gathering and the conference.
Thank you. The conference is, Thursday, September 26th. It is specifically for pastors and church leaders who were not taught this stuff. I certainly wasn't. Learned it through the school of hard knocks, just like everyone else. And I recognize that, for that many people in our churches to have experienced trauma, and for us to not have any idea of what that means, what the effect is on them, or how what I am saying and preaching in my churches may be affecting them or re-traumatizing without me even knowing it, much less being intentional about it, or ways that I think and feel like I'm communicating grace, but actually is being received as shame, what do I do with that? Right. And this is not to beat pastors into submission saying, oh, you're so bad, you're so wrong. Not at all. We recognize how impossible the job is. We recognize how hard it is to do all of these things. And we want to serve, to help, to grow in your understanding of trauma and how it affects the sheep in your care, to increase your awareness of systemic issues, right, that knowingly or unknowingly perpetuate abuse and trauma. A lot of the work that I do centers around self-awareness and emotional intelligence, right? Answering the two questions: what is it like to be me, and what is it like to be around me? And is there anyone on my staff that I can genuinely, honestly ask that question to and receive an actual honest response from? If not, then there's work to be done there, right? And to find out how to implement safeguarding practices within your churches and organizations to prevent future spiritual abuse and religious trauma from ever occurring. Is it going to happen? Absolutely. Can I do everything in my power and control in a healthy, good, God-honoring way to prevent that from happening while I'm here? 100%. And so we are inviting, obviously, you, which I can't wait, to talk about your experience, because you're in the unique position that you are still currently a pastor, and you've experienced the absolute terror of spiritual abuse and religious trauma. And so I think you are going to bring a really unique perspective on what that means to be able to speak to pastors from both perspectives of, hey, I've been there and I'm here right now. I'm in it with you. And so what does it look like to create safe, consistent, and trustworthy churches, right? Jeff and Sid Holsclaw, also pastors. I think they're up in the Grand Rapids area. She's a spiritual director. He's a professor. They're authors of a book, Deeply Attached to God. They do a lot of attachment work, which we hear a lot about these days. Like, how does my environment and experience with my early childhood caregivers affect the way that I view myself, my relationships with myself, with others, and especially with God? Recognizing that people come to you with all this extra stuff that you may not be aware of because of the home that they grew up in, or the school that they lived at, or whatever it was in their relationships. So how do we repair these distorted default assumptions that we have about ourselves? And so we want as many pastors as possible to be equipped with these tools to see their congregations more clearly, to recognize all the different places and directions they're coming from, to move away from this mentality of being mechanics towards being gardeners. What does it look like to be a good shepherd, right? Not a good manager, not a good leader. Jesus doesn't talk about creating leaders. He talks about creating followers. So what does that look like for me as a pastor, as a shepherd, as a leader in my church, to do those things? And then the gathering is Friday, September 27th, and it is specifically for those who have been wounded by the church and their advocates who want to speak and stand up on their behalf. And again, you and I are in unique positions that we fall into both categories. And we want to create a space that is as open and safe and welcoming for us as possible, to not feel triggered and activated and surrounded by language that will make it sound like I'm supposed to triumph over all things, even though the Bible promises that we will. It's language that is not helpful to me in this moment because that language has been weaponized against me, right? So how do we come in with this trauma sensitive and trauma aware, trauma informed approach that says, hey, listen, I know what you've been through. I may not have your exact story, but I know what it feels like. And I see you, I hear you, I believe you, and here are some really practical resources to move toward healing and wholeness. And I could not have asked for better than Andy Colbert to bring in therapist, best-selling author of Try Softer and Strong Like Water, to come in and help us all day long, to just give us tools to recognize, hey, how do I recognize when I'm outside of my window of tolerance? What do I do to regulate my body in ways that say, okay, I'm here. I'm not back in my moment of trauma. This is where I am. Here are some exercises I can do. Here are people I can call on or resources I can use. And what does it look like to move forward from where I am now so I'm not constantly stuck in the past?
Friends, I cannot stress this enough. If you are a pastor and you have an executive pastor or you have a teaching pastor, you have a key elder, come that Thursday. I'm telling you, this is gonna be in a very beautiful church space. It's gonna be amazing. But the conversations that are gonna happen, the messages that are gonna be shared, the connection, is, I think, gonna be really, really important. And here's why. I tell this to as many leaders and pastors as I can. Like, at your board meetings, you should be talking about this kind of thing. Like, twice a year. Hey, are we trauma informed? Like if this situation were to happen, and I just play the hypothetical game, if this situation, how would we choose to respond? And just play it out.
Yeah.
And I think what's going to be good for you pastors is like to be able to come into this conference and have a chance just to learn, to receive, but be prepared if and when you are ever in a situation where something has happened under your watch. You're going to know how to care for that person well and care for the congregation well, rather than preserve, defend, and protect the institution. And so I really would love to invite you to be there. I'd love to hang out with you. Please message me. Let me know if you're coming. But then here's the other one. And this is just as Brian was talking. I hadn't thought about this. Now, you all know Andi Kolber's like one of my closest friends. So I'm a big fan of her and her husband. They're just amazing people. And her work is just phenomenal. Yes, totally. But when you were talking, Brian, I thought about something, and I'm so sorry I missed this. I had not thought about this, but as you were talking, 7 different names came to mind of congregants and allies who I could personally invite. I might, I think about like the police force. I think I might lose a lot of listeners with this analogy, but I believe that what we've asked of the police is just way too much. Like, they went to school to do some stuff, and now they're having to handle mental health. They're having to handle all of these issues that they weren't trained for. When you're talking about being a pastor today, we're being asked to handle so much that we weren't trained for.
Yeah.
Well, one of the ways that I can show the best care is not trying to do it all in my own strength, but invite them to come and hear and be around people like you and Andi and learn the window of tolerance. And I think for some of you, go to brokentobeloved.org as pastors. Look at the gathering on Friday and prayerfully consider, are there like 3 people in your congregation? Just send them an email and say, hey, would you ever consider going? If you got like some money in the budget, be like, hey, I'll buy your ticket. You got to get yourself there. But like, you got to show a little skin in the game. But like, I want you to be there, because I think what Andi will bring and what Brian and the crew is set up could actually be really helpful for you in this season, to see that there are allies and there are people who are walking the same journey as you are, and you're not alone. And I might not be able to be the one who can help you, but man, I will be the one who will shepherd you towards a safe space. And this is a safe space. I don't know. Just as you were talking, I'm like, I just started rattling off these names, and I'm like, I got to invite them to the Friday gathering. And there's nothing I'm doing. I don't get any like kickback on who comes. There's no like, you type in S Carter, and you get 15% off, and I get that. Like, there's none of that. I just, as you were describing it, I was like, oh, that's a way I can care for people in my congregation who I think would really be blessed by this gathering. So thank you. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Brian, where can people find you?
Yeah, we're everywhere online. Brokentobeloved.org is the website. You can find all the conference and gathering information there. We're on Instagram the most, at Broken to Beloved, is mostly where I post. We have our own podcast, which you're going to be showing up on, and we got all kinds of other stuff, but you can find it all on the website or the Instagram account.
I'm telling you, their Instagram's a great follow. They also are been doing these book clubs, and it's just it's a cool talk. Just talk for a second about the book club, because I think it's a really cool concept where people from all over can like just gather. Talk about that.
Yeah, thank you. It's my attempt at creating some kind of community around these topics that provide resources that move people toward healing and wholeness, right? So we just finished the book, The Understory by Lori Wilbert. And it's this idea of she lives up in the Adirondacks and loves to take hikes through the woods. And so often when you're walking through the woods, there's all this dead matter that you're walking on, right? And she talks about these old growth forests, and this famous tree had fallen and died. And it's easy to mourn the death of that tree. And yet, in the understory, all the litter that's on the ground, there is so much life happening. And what does it look like for us to find and see and just wait long enough to discover it, that when the death surrounds us, that there's actually life happening, right? So that's one of the books we just finished. This month, we're going to start reading I Shouldn't Feel This Way by Allison Cook. And we try as often as she's going to be coming with us in September to do the book discussion with us. Lori was here to do the book discussion with us. We have an online community that's off of social media, so you're not distracted by everything else. You're just here to talk about the book, to connect with each other. We do live weekly meetups and virtual reading sessions, so you don't feel like you're doing it all by yourself. But it's such a fun way to just build community with like-minded people who just want these kinds of resources that can be helpful and tell me a next step of, hey, what's a different way that I can see this? What's another step that I can take?
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. And it's just, again, one of those ways, again, for many of us leaders who weren't, and pastors who weren't like trained up, just to be aware and hear, highly recommend it. Last thing I would say is, and Brian doesn't know I'm doing this, so, but last thing I would say is, you guys are a not-for-profit. And I think it's really amazing what you're doing. And there might be some church leaders who are listening to this saying, hey, we're going to go into the end of the year campaign, and we might have some extra money to be generous towards something. I can't think of a more important conversation. If we're thinking about the preservation of the local church, not the preservation of the institution, the preservation of like the dream that God had in the scriptures about this local community, that to support Broken to Beloved and to come alongside and just maybe, hey, we have an extra $1,000 that we just want to bless for future conferences or gatherings or conversations or opportunities to pour into other pastors or coach. I just want to say that, because this isn't like a for-profit going to build up one. This is not like, this is something that's trying to help the local church. And maybe you're a congregant and you want to just learn a little bit more, go to brokentobeloved.org and check out what they're doing. Maybe you want to like be a supporter. Again, Brian had no idea I was going to say this. I just think it's an important invitation if we care for the church. And I think a lot of people are like, I care for the church and I'm like supporting church planting networks. Fantastic. That's great. There's no shade on that. I just want to make sure that the churches finish well, and the churches actually help people heal well, and the churches walk with people in their pain well, and churches actually do what we're called to do well. And to do that, we need to get well, and we need organizations to help us, like Broken to Beloved. So my friends, thank you so much for tuning in to the Crafting Character podcast. Come join me September 26th in Richmond, in Virginia, for the conference if you're a pastor or leader. And I'm actually staying over the next day just to listen and receive for the 28th or 27th, where Andy Culber will be speaking to allies and congregants who have experienced trauma and abuse. And maybe you know someone, invite them. But I hope to see you there. Much love, everyone. Grace and peace.